In the calm of night, when the world turns slow and still, imagine the sound of soft rain against stone, the low hum of a faraway bell, the faint echo of footsteps through endless corridors. Tonight, we drift gently into another time, far beyond noise and rush, into the quiet halls of an ancient palace. Candles flicker against tall windows, their flames bending slightly with the whisper of air. Shadows move carefully along the walls like memories that never quite fade. The air smells faintly of wax, wood, and time itself. Somewhere in that vast stillness, a story unfolds. It is not a story of battle or conquest, not one of loud victories or tragic cries. It is a story of composure, patience, and endurance. It belongs to a woman who lived her life beneath the weight of a crown and the constant gaze of history. Her name was Elizabeth. Some called her powerful, some called her distant, but tonight we will see her as she truly was: quiet, deliberate, and human. The night outside her palace was often silent, the world wrapped in mist and expectation. Within those stone walls, time seemed to move more slowly. Servants whispered in measured tones, courtiers passed with careful grace, and every sound seemed to echo longer than it should. The palace itself breathed with a rhythm of its own, steady, patient, timeless. Elizabeth was born into that rhythm, into a place where everything mattered and every movement was seen. She came into a world bright with silk and ceremony, but heavy with secrets that moved like currents beneath calm water. Even as a child, she understood that silence could be safer than words, and that in stillness there was strength. She grew surrounded by books, by maps, by lessons whispered over candlelight. Her tutors taught her languages, history, and the art of balance. She learned to write neatly, to listen before speaking, and to carry herself with quiet precision. There were moments of laughter, but even those felt careful, shaped by the walls around her. Outside, the world was full of movement, carriages rolling over cobblestones, the sound of distant music drifting through courtyards, the chatter of markets beyond the gates. But inside, her world was ordered, composed. Time passed not in days but in duties, morning lessons, afternoon walks, evenings spent in reading or embroidery. Each hour was marked by routine, each gesture by grace. In her solitude, Elizabeth found peace in observation. She studied faces, the way people spoke, the tone behind their words. She noticed how calm could settle even the most restless room, how silence could make others reveal more than speech. It became her language, quiet, deliberate, unwavering. Sometimes she would walk through the gardens where the air smelled of earth and rain. The flowers, arranged in perfect rows, seemed to listen as she passed. She liked those walks, the way time softened when she was alone among the trees. There she could breathe freely, away from eyes that watched and judged. The world outside might shift and twist with ambition, but within her steps lay a calm that no one could break. As years turned, the palace grew both familiar and distant. Rooms changed, faces disappeared, but the rhythm remained. She understood the world's quiet truth, that much of life happens not in the noise of decision but in the stillness before it. Waiting became her art, composure her armor. She carried herself with the weightless balance of someone who understood that every choice began first in silence. At night, when the corridors dimmed and the candles burned low, Elizabeth would sit by her window and watch the pale moon hang over the gardens. The light touched her face gently, and the shadows seemed to bend toward her in reverence. She would think of the day behind her, of what was said and left unsaid, and of the countless tomorrows waiting quietly beyond the horizon. There was no need for words, no need for triumph. In those moments, her life felt simple, a thread woven through history, steady and calm. The world outside might rise and fall, but she remained still, a quiet figure framed in silver light. And so the story begins not with a crown, but with calm. Not with ceremony, but with silence. In her stillness, Elizabeth carried something rare, the quiet strength to simply endure. The palace around her may have been vast and filled with the restless hum of power, yet within her there was only peace. And as the night deepens, her story drifts forward, soft as a breath, steady as the ticking of time. Lessons and shadows. The days of childhood passed gently, like pages turning in a long and careful book. The palace remained her entire world, the place of her lessons, her meals, her quiet walks. The walls were tall, the rooms wide and filled with echoes, and every sound seemed to drift slowly, never rushing to fade. In that space, time felt softer, as if the sun itself moved with courtesy around her windows. Elizabeth began to grow into her own rhythm. Her tutors came each morning, bearing scrolls and ink, ready to fill the hours with study, Latin, Greek, history, and the art of speech. She listened closely, absorbing not only the words but the manner in which they were said. To her, knowledge was not noise, it was stillness given form. It was the quiet between questions that carried the truth. Her teachers admired her composure. She did not interrupt, did not rush to answer. When she spoke, her voice carried the same balance that later would define her life. Calm, measured, clear. Even then, she seemed to understand that words could build or destroy with the same ease, and that silence was often the safer choice. The mornings in the palace were filled with light. Dust floated in the beams that crossed her desk, drifting like tiny stars in the air. The sound of quills scratching paper was constant, broken only by the gentle clearing of a tutor's throat. Elizabeth loved that sound. It meant progress, learning, movement, but all without hurry. Afternoons were quieter. She would often sit near a window with a book resting on her lap. Beyond the glass stretched gardens and courtyards, bright under the sky. Sometimes she watched the leaves stir in the wind, their motion a reminder that even stillness held life. The world, she realized, did not need to shout to exist. It could breathe quietly and still be strong. There were times when she was left alone, hours where footsteps faded, and only the soft creak of wood kept her company. In those moments, her thoughts became her friends. She built entire worlds within her mind, not of fantasy, but of reason. She imagined how choices might ripple outward, how patience might shape destiny more deeply than force. The servants admired her gentleness. They spoke of her grace when she passed, the way she moved as if guided by some inner rhythm. They said she carried herself like someone aware that the world was fragile. She smiled rarely, but when she did, it felt genuine, brief, and bright, like sunlight after a long rain. As seasons changed, the palace itself seemed to breathe with her. In winter, fires burned low in the hearths, filling the halls with soft warmth and faint smoke. In summer, windows opened to the hum of distant life. Time repeated itself gently, each year blending into the next. The rhythm of her days became something eternal, something unhurried and whole. One of her tutors, an older man with tired eyes, once told her that patience was not simply waiting, but holding peace while waiting. She remembered that lesson for the rest of her life. It became her quiet compass, the thread that would guide her through years of change and solitude. At dusk, she sometimes walked through the corridors where candlelight flickered against tapestries. The faces woven into the fabric, kings, queens, and warriors, watched her pass. She wondered what they had known, what they had lost, what silence had taught them. She felt no envy toward their grandeur. Their lives seemed loud, restless, and fleeting. Hers, by contrast, was steady, thoughtful, and built on quiet observation. As she grew older, the world around her began to reveal more complexity. She noticed the movements of courtiers, the small glances, the carefully chosen words, the weight of things not said. She began to see that life was made not of simple truths, but of layers. Some visible, some hidden. She learned to listen not only to what people said, but to what they meant, and perhaps more importantly, to what they avoided saying. It was in these lessons that Elizabeth began to understand the power of calm. Not the calm that ignores storms, but the kind that can stand within them without being moved. It was a lesson that would one day define her rule, though she could not yet know it. For now, it simply shaped her way of being. A stillness that grew deeper with each passing year. Sometimes she would climb to the high terrace above the gardens, where she could see far beyond the palace walls. From there the horizon stretched endlessly, pale blue fading into grey. The fields and villages below seemed peaceful from such distance, the world appearing orderly and small. She liked that view. It reminded her that time had no hurry, and that even the vastest lands existed in silence before sound. Evenings were her favorite hours. As the sun sank, she would sit by her desk and write by candlelight. Her handwriting was precise, flowing like quiet water. She wrote of her studies, her thoughts, and the calm details of each day. Her words were not grand or poetic, but honest. Reflections of a life measured by stillness. Sometimes, as the night deepened, she felt the faint ache of solitude. Yet it did not trouble her. She understood that solitude was not the same as loneliness. It was the space in which she could think freely, breathe easily, and remain wholly herself. The quiet did not confine her. It protected her. On certain nights, she could hear faint music drifting through the halls, lutes and viols playing in distant rooms. The melodies moved slowly, like sleepwalking notes, and she would close her eyes, letting them carry her away. The world softened in those sounds, and she felt weightless, a part of something gentle, ancient, and unbroken. In this way, her youth passed, not quickly, not loudly, but with a rhythm as even as her breath. The palace around her changed little. The same marble floors, the same tapestries, the same winding corridors, yet she became a mirror for calmness itself. When others entered her presence, they spoke softer, moved slower, and often left with lighter hearts. There was something about her that asked for peace, not with demand but with example. She carried serenity the way some carried titles. Naturally, years later, those who knew her in her youth would remember the quiet girl in the corner of the study, reading while the world outside hurried past. They would remember the way she seemed to hear more than was spoken, and how, even as a child, she held an air of patience that felt older than her years. Her lessons were never just in books. They were in the pauses between conversations, in the way morning light touched her pages, in the rhythm of footsteps echoing through long corridors. Each moment taught her that and as she grew, the shadows of that palace became her teachers too. Gentle reminders that every bright surface has depth, and that understanding comes not from seeing everything clearly, but from learning to be still in the dimness. By the time her childhood ended, Elizabeth had already mastered what many never learn: the art of quiet strength. Her composure, her patience, her calm were not born of privilege, but of practice. And though the years ahead would bring storms she could not yet imagine, the foundation of her stillness had already been laid. It was in those early years, among the lessons and shadows of her palace, that she became who she was meant to be, not by force, but by peace. The waiting years. The years began to move differently. Childhood, with its soft lessons and gentle hours, had passed quietly into something heavier, slower, more uncertain. The palace no longer felt like a cradle. It was a labyrinth now, familiar yet full of rooms that seemed to whisper of decisions not yet made. Elizabeth moved through its corridors with the same composure as before, but her thoughts had deepened. They stretched further now, beyond her tutors and her books, reaching toward a world she had only glimpsed from windows. She had grown taller, her voice steadier, her presence quieter, but stronger. Those who worked in the palace noticed the change. The girl who once listened to stories now carried a silence that made others lower their own voices. She spoke little, and when she did, her words were chosen with care, each one deliberate, precise, balanced. There was patience in her speech, but also something beneath it, a strength born from long observation. The days settled into a rhythm of calm activity. She read, she walked, she watched. She continued her lessons in language and diplomacy, but much of what she learned now came not from books, but from people, from how they behaved when they thought no one was looking, from the soft edge of hesitation in a conversation, from the small tremor of a hand that gave away uncertainty. The world was full of lessons, and Elizabeth absorbed them all without a word. There were gatherings in the great hall, dinners full of laughter and low music. She attended them as duty required, sitting with poise, her expression gentle but unreadable. The others smiled, spoke quickly, filled the space with movement and sound. Elizabeth remained still, her eyes calm, her thoughts elsewhere. She found comfort in the quiet between moments, in the clink of glass after the laughter faded, in the echo of footsteps after the hall emptied. Outside, the world changed with the seasons. Gardens that once bloomed with wild color now seemed more subdued, trimmed, ordered. The air in winter carried the smell of smoke and frost, the hush of evenings falling early. In spring, the earth softened again, and she could hear the soft rush of wind through the trees beyond the palace walls. She took long walks during those seasons, her hands folded behind her, her steps measured, her mind turning gently through questions that had no clear answers. Waiting had become a part of her life. Waiting for letters, for news, for decisions that were not hers to make. Each passing month brought rumors, whispers that moved like thin smoke through the corridors. She listened, never responding, letting the noise settle before drawing any meaning from it. It was in those years that she learned the art of stillness, not just as a habit, but as a way to survive uncertainty. The palace taught her that everything moved in cycles, the rise and fall of voices, the turning of seasons, the coming and going of faces. Some servants she had known for years would vanish without notice, replaced by new ones who spoke differently, carried different stories. She greeted them all the same, with kindness but also distance. Not coldness, just a quiet reserve that protected her from the constant shifting of the world around her. At night, her room remained the same, a single candle on the desk, a book half open, the faint glow of moonlight across the floor. She would read until her eyes grew heavy, her thoughts blending into the rhythm of her breathing. The sound of wind outside the window became her companion. There were times she would stand there, looking into the darkness beyond the glass, wondering how far the night stretched and whether peace existed anywhere beyond those walls. Her waiting was not wasted. Though nothing seemed to move on the surface, something inside her was being shaped, like stone under slow water. The long hours of silence gave her clarity. The stillness made her see. She began to understand that life would not always reveal its purpose loudly. Some destinies arrive quietly in the form of patience tested again and again. Sometimes when the palace slept, she would wander the corridors, her footsteps soft against the stone. The air was cool and full of echoes. She would trace her hand along the carved wood of door frames, the cold surface of the walls. Every hallway seemed endless, yet she knew each turn by heart. The quiet was comforting, like a familiar friend. In those moments, she could breathe without expectation. The night belonged to her alone. She kept a small notebook by her bedside, not a diary of secrets, but a place to write single thoughts, phrases, fragments, half-formed reflections. Some nights she wrote only a line. Patience is a language. Another night, stillness is strength when noise is weakness. Those sentences were not meant for anyone else. They were her reminders, quiet markers of understanding gathered through time. In her heart, she knew change would come, though she could not predict when or how. She sensed it like one senses a storm beyond the horizon, not yet visible, but already moving. And still, she did not hurry it. She had learned that life, like the seasons, unfolds in its own rhythm. What is meant to arrive will come when the air is ready to carry it. There were mornings when she would rise before dawn. The palace would be hushed, the world outside caught between darkness and light. She would stand by the window and watch as the sky softened into grey, then gold. In those moments, she felt time breathe, slow, patient, eternal. It reminded her that waiting was not absence, but preparation. As the years unfolded, Elizabeth's calm became a quiet legend within the palace. Servants spoke of her grace, courtiers of her steadiness. She never sought attention, but it found her all the same. The world trusted her silence more than the noise of others. And she, though still young, carried herself as someone who understood both presence and distance, the delicate art of being part of the world without being consumed by it. And so the waiting continued. It stretched like a long melody, soft and unbroken. But within it, something powerful was taking shape. Not ambition, not desire, but readiness. She would never call it that, never think of it as purpose. Yet it was there all the same, quietly growing inside her. In time, history would remember her for her rule, her decisions, her endurance. But long before any of that, before the crown and the titles, there was this, the long, patient stillness of waiting. It was here, in the silent years between youth and power, that Elizabeth became truly herself. She did not rush toward destiny. She simply prepared a place for it to arrive. The crown and the calm. The quiet years had prepared her, though she never truly knew, for what. Patience, silence, observation, all the lessons gathered in the stillness of her youth were about to be tested by something far greater than solitude. Change arrived as most great changes do, softly at first, then all at once. The palace, which had long been her sanctuary of study and reflection, seemed to hold its breath. The air grew heavier, the footsteps of messengers quickened, and voices lingered behind closed doors. Letters came sealed in deep red wax, carried by trembling hands. Elizabeth did not rush to speak or to question. She watched and she listened. She had learned that those who remain silent often see most clearly. When the crown came to her, it did not arrive as a dream. It came as a weight, precise, unyielding, and cold. The golden circle was not made for comfort. When it was placed upon her head, she felt its pressure not only on her brow, but deep within her heart. To others it symbolized glory, but to her it was a quiet reminder that peace would no longer be simple. The great hall filled with music and light that morning. The ceremony unfolded in careful rhythm, each motion rehearsed, each voice controlled. Yet to Elizabeth, it all seemed distant, almost unreal. The sound of the choir echoed faintly, the crowd bowed, and the air shimmered with warmth and expectation. She stood still among it all, breathing slowly, her eyes calm. When the last notes faded and the final words were spoken, silence returned. It was that silence, not the applause or the acclamation, that stayed with her. As she walked through the corridors afterward, the walls seemed taller, the windows brighter, and every familiar space now held new meaning. The palace had not changed, but she had. In the days that followed, she learned the rhythm of power. It was not loud or dazzling. It was constant, a steady pulse that demanded presence and precision. Each morning brought decisions to make, papers to sign, and faces to read. People came to her with hopes and demands, their voices careful, their words shaped to please. She met them all with the same composure, neither cold nor eager, simply calm. The stillness she had cultivated for years became her strength. Her mornings began before dawn. She rose quietly before even the servants stirred. The first light of day touched the edges of her window, and the world outside was painted in shades of silver and grey. She would stand there for a moment, her hands resting gently on the sill, watching the horizon. That hour, before the noise began, belonged to her alone. It was when her thoughts were clearest, her breath most even, her mind most still. As the palace awakened, the sound of footsteps filled the halls. Pages carried documents, voices murmured softly, attendants bowed as they passed. Elizabeth walked through it all with slow certainty. In every room she brought with her the quiet rhythm of her own steadiness. The court adapted to her calm. Where others had once spoken quickly, they now paused. Where they had rushed, they now moved carefully. It was not fear that slowed them, but respect for her restraint. Elizabeth ruled not through volume, but through gravity, the kind that comes when someone's stillness carries more weight than another's words. When others argued, she waited. When they sought quick answers, she paused. That pause, that small gap of silence, was her most powerful gesture. It made others listen to themselves. It made them think. Her table was always kept in perfect order. Documents were arranged neatly, pens lined up with care, and candles burned at the same height. It was a small discipline, yet it gave her comfort. In a world full of shifting alliances and restless ambition, she found peace in the certainty of order. In the evenings, she often walked in the gardens. The air was cool, the gravel soft beneath her steps. Lanterns glowed faintly along the paths, and the leaves rustled quietly in the wind. The same fountains that had once been her companions in childhood now whispered a different song. Their sound was familiar, yet changed, deeper, slower, older. She sometimes wondered whether the world itself had aged with her. Her life became a balance of duty and reflection. There was always more to be done, letters unanswered, matters unsettled, questions awaiting her voice. Yet she never hurried. She understood that haste was the enemy of clarity. Her calm was not absence of thought, but the space where thought could truly breathe. There were nights when she felt the weight of isolation pressing gently against her chest. She would sit by her fire, hands resting in her lap, eyes on the flame. The crackle of wood was her only companion. Yet even in those moments, she felt no despair. Solitude, she knew, was not emptiness. It was quiet company, a reminder that stillness could sustain even the loneliest heart. Sometimes, during long meetings in the council chamber, she drifted briefly into memory. The murmur of voices blurred into background sound, replaced by the steady echo of her own heartbeat. She remembered her tutors, her walks, the lessons of patience and silence. And when she returned to the present, she carried that same composure into every decision. Those around her often speculated about what she truly felt. Some said she was emotionless, others believed she hid too much, but the truth was simpler. Elizabeth had learned that peace, once broken, is hard to restore. She guarded it like a flame in a windstorm, protected not by walls, but by discipline. Beyond the palace, the world moved restlessly. Yet within, she maintained her own rhythm. The courtiers came and went, the seasons shifted, but her steadiness did not waver. She did not control every event, but she controlled herself. And that, she believed, was the essence of true power. There were nights when she could not sleep. On those nights, she would walk again to the window. Below her, the city stretched out in quiet stillness, its rooftops washed in moonlight. Tiny lanterns glowed in the distance like scattered stars. She would breathe deeply, the cool air filling her lungs, and remind herself that even in silence, life continued. People slept, children dreamed, and the world turned. Her burdens were hers alone, and she carried them willingly. Her calm deepened over the years. It was no longer just a habit or a choice, but something elemental. It shaped her voice, her thoughts, her very presence. To be near her was to feel a slower rhythm, as if time itself hesitated in respect. The servants whispered about her serenity. The advisors trusted her steadiness. And though she rarely smiled when she did, it carried warmth enough to still an entire room. As the years unfolded, Elizabeth came to understand that the crown itself was not a prize, but a promise to remain composed when others faltered, to hold stillness when the world demanded haste. Power, she had learned, was not loud, it was quiet endurance. And so, as the moon rose once more above the palace, she stood by the window, her reflection mingling with the night sky. The crown rested on a table beside her, gleaming faintly in the candlelight. She looked at it not with pride or fear, but with understanding. This, she thought, is what it truly means to rule, not through command, but through calm. Not through sound, but through silence. The court and the calm. Morning came gently over the palace, spreading slow light across the quiet walls. The first sounds of the day were soft, the faint sweep of brooms on stone, the hush of footsteps in distant corridors, the muted calls of servants preparing the world for her awakening. Elizabeth stood by the same window she had watched through the night before, her reflection still framed in silver light. The city beyond the glass was stirring, unaware of her gaze, unaware of how carefully she had measured the coming day. She dressed simply, her movements unhurried, her thoughts already forming into order. Outside, The sound of bells drifted faintly, marking the hour. The palace was awake now, and with it came the slow rise of obligation. The court waited. When she entered the great chamber, the air shifted. Conversations dimmed. The long table gleamed beneath the morning sun, polished and exact. Papers lay stacked in neat rows, ready to be read, debated, and signed. Elizabeth's eyes moved across them with calm focus. Her mind was already at work, not in haste, but with precision. She greeted no one immediately, yet her presence alone was enough to steady the room. Her council began their reports. Each voice carried its own rhythm, cautious, hopeful, sometimes uncertain. She listened to every word, her attention unwavering. She spoke rarely, but when she did, the entire court leaned forward. Her sentences were few but complete, each word chosen, each tone deliberate. "Proceed carefully," she said once, her voice low and even. "Speed does not make a thing right." No one argued. It was this balance, this calm within command, that defined her rule. She had learned that control was not in the act of speaking, but in the art of listening. And the court, shaped slowly by her example, began to change. Meetings grew quieter, more measured. The noise of ambition softened beneath her gaze. Even disagreement found gentler form, expressed in tones of respect rather than rush. She did not demand this calm. It arrived naturally, drawn to her like the tide to the moon. At midday, she took her meal in solitude. It was not loneliness she sought, but clarity. Her table was simple, her food light, a small tray of fruit, bread, and tea. She preferred the silence to the chatter of attendants. In the hush of her private chambers, she could think without intrusion. The sound of a cup being set down was enough company. After lunch, she often walked through the gallery. Portraits lined the walls, faces from generations before her, painted in quiet pride. She looked at them with a kind of distant sympathy. Each one had ruled in their time, had believed themselves unshaken, and yet here they remained only as color and frame. Power, she knew, was never permanent. But dignity, that could last longer than the flesh. The afternoon hours brought letters and signatures. Decisions required her name, and she gave it without drama. Her handwriting was steady, her pen gliding as if guided by memory. Each mark represented a choice, but she never let the weight of them show. Calm, she believed, was not a mask, it was armor. Sometimes, from her desk, she could hear laughter from the courtyards below. Servants talking, children running. The sound reached her like a faint melody. It reminded her that beyond duty, life continued in simpler forms. It gave her quiet satisfaction. The thought that peace, however brief, still existed beyond the walls of power. As the day faded, the golden light of late afternoon filled her study. Dust floated gently in the air, moving like tiny stars in slow dance. The palace settled into evening rhythm. Voices lowered, footsteps softened. The endless pace of duty began to slow. Elizabeth closed the final document of the day and rested her pen. The silence that followed was the kind she loved most, earned, complete, without need for sound. She rose and walked once more to the window. The city below was changing color, roofs and towers glowing with the last warmth of the sun. She watched the horizon darken into violet, then deep blue. Behind her, the candles flickered to life, their light steady and warm. She thought of the years that had passed, of the girl she once was, moving quietly through these same halls, her hands folded behind her back, her thoughts too large for her age. That girl had learned to wait. The woman she had become had learned to endure. The palace around her was no longer the same, though its walls remained unchanged. The sound of her name carried differently now, softer when spoken, yet heavier in meaning. She had learned to carry it with grace. Her calm did not come without effort. There were moments, brief, hidden, private, when the weight of rule pressed too deeply. In those moments, she did not cry or curse or call for company. She simply breathed, slowly, deeply, until her pulse returned to its rhythm. The art of ruling, she understood, was not only about decision, but about balance, to hold strength and gentleness in equal measure, to act without haste, to speak without fear, to lead without noise. In the evenings, when the halls emptied and the fires burned low, she often took a final walk through the quiet rooms. Her footsteps echoed faintly, and the tapestries stirred in the soft air. Each corridor carried memory, laughter, ceremony, silence. The palace was both alive and ancient, its walls full of voices that no longer spoke. She moved through it all with quiet reverence. This place had shaped her, watched her, kept her secrets. Now it served her in return. When she reached the grand staircase, she paused, hand resting on the railing. The marble beneath her feet was cool and smooth. She looked up toward the tall windows where the last light of the evening lingered. The glow was faint but steady. She thought of time, how it moved without notice, how it took everything and left only echoes. Yet she did not fear it. She had long made peace with the passing of things. To her, time was not an enemy. It was simply the space in which calm could take form. Later, as night fully claimed the sky, she returned to her chamber. The fire had burned low, the candlelight soft and golden. She removed the crown from its place and set it gently upon the table beside her. It gleamed faintly, silent, unchanging. She sat for a long time, hands folded, eyes unfocused. The stillness around her was complete. It felt less like emptiness and more like completion, as if every sound, every thought, every worry had been folded neatly away. Outside, the wind whispered through the trees, and the faint hum of the city faded into distance. The world rested, and so did she. In that quiet, Elizabeth understood the truth she had always known, that calm was not the absence of burden, but the grace to carry it. And as she closed her eyes, the palace, the court, the crown, all seemed to breathe with her, slow and steady, in unison with her quiet heart. The silence between storms. The rain had come quietly in the night. It began as a whisper against the windows, then grew steady, a rhythm soft and endless. By morning, the palace seemed to breathe beneath a grey sky. Every sound was gentler, as if the world itself had decided to move slower. Elizabeth woke before dawn, as she always did, and listened to the rain for a long time before she rose. The air smelled of wet stone and earth. When she opened the window, a cool breeze drifted through the room. The gardens below shimmered with droplets, each leaf carrying its own small light. It was not a storm, not yet. Only the steady patience before one. She dressed in silence. The attendants moved softly around her, their footsteps muffled on the rugs. She said little, only nodded once or twice as they adjusted her sleeves. Outside, thunder rolled far away, low and distant. It was the kind of sound that did not frighten her. It reminded her instead of time itself, deep, slow, inevitable. When she entered the council chamber, the windows were fogged with mist. Candles burned to push back the dimness, and the room smelled faintly of wax and rain. Her advisors stood waiting, papers already open, pens poised. She greeted them with a quiet nod and took her seat. The meeting began as all others did, with reports, figures, words spoken in careful tones. Yet the atmosphere felt different today, heavier, uncertain. There were matters beyond their walls that could not be ignored, unrest, rumors, shifting loyalties. She listened to it all without change of expression. The calm she wore was not indifference, but discipline. When one advisor spoke too quickly, his voice trembling with anxiety, she lifted her gaze. Her eyes met his, not harshly, but firmly enough to steady him. He exhaled, and the room quieted again. She had that effect. To bring stillness simply by being present. "Let us wait," she said softly. "The truth always arrives after the noise." The rain continued. It struck the glass in gentle rhythm, like a second voice speaking in the background. The discussion resumed, slower now, more deliberate. And though the problems were many, the tension began to ease. Calm, once again, had found its place. By midday, the storm had grown stronger. Wind swept across the courtyards, bending the trees. Servants hurried to close shutters, their voices faint in the distance. Inside, the world seemed suspended. Elizabeth dismissed her counsel and walked alone through the halls. Her steps echoed softly against the stone. She passed portraits of kings and queens long gone, their faces fixed in solemn calm. She wondered if they too had known this feeling, the quiet before great change, the strange peace that came not from certainty, but from acceptance. In the gallery, she paused before a tall window. Beyond the glass, the gardens blurred in rain. Paths she had walked so many times were hidden now beneath sheets of silver. It was beautiful in its way, the surrender of all form to motion. For a long moment, she simply watched. A servant approached quietly and offered her a letter. The wax seal was dark, the handwriting familiar. She took it, thanked him, and waited until she was alone before breaking it open. The words inside were formal but heavy with meaning. News of conflict far from the palace, distant yet close enough to matter. She read slowly, her face calm, her pulse even. When she finished, she folded the paper and set it aside. She did not speak. Instead, she returned to the window and let her eyes rest on the rain again. The world outside was changing. She could feel it in the air, in the way the sky held its color. Yet she did not fear the change. Storms, she knew, were not enemies. They were the necessary breath between stillness. That afternoon, she called for her secretaries. Letters had to be written, messages sent. Her instructions were precise and measured. No panic, no haste. Each word crafted with care. She signed them one by one, sealing each with her crest. The room filled with the faint scent of ink and wax. When the last letter was done, she leaned back slightly, letting the sound of rain fill the silence. The task was finished. The moment of noise had passed. All that remained was to wait again, to listen for what the world would say next. Later, as evening came, the storm reached its height. Thunder rolled across the horizon, lightning flashed briefly, turning the windows white. Servants lit more candles, their flames flickering, but holding steady. Elizabeth sat by the fire, the crown resting on the table beside her. She did not flinch when the thunder struck closer. Instead, she watched the fire move, the way the flames bent and straightened, how they survived their own chaos. It reminded her of the world she led. No storm lasted forever, but each one left a shape behind. In the calm between those shapes, she found her place. Hours passed, the rain softened, the thunder faded. The night grew quiet again. The air smelled clean, almost new. She rose and walked to the door of her chamber, stepping into the corridor. The candles burned low along the walls, their light trembling but constant. The palace, though vast, felt almost intimate at this hour. She moved through it slowly, touching the smooth surface of the railings, the carved details of the doors. Everything was familiar, yet every night felt slightly different, shaped by the silence that followed each storm. When she reached the grand window at the end of the corridor, she stopped. Outside, the rain had nearly ceased. A few drops still clung to the glass, catching the glow of the moon as it began to emerge from the clouds. The air shimmered faintly, washed and quiet. She stood there for a long time, breathing evenly. The world was still again, but it was not the same stillness as before. It carried the memory of sound, the echo of thunder, the whisper of rain, the rhythm of change. And in that silence, she found comfort. For Elizabeth, peace had never meant the absence of storms. It was the understanding that storms would always come, and that calm was not their opposite, but their companion. As she turned back toward her chamber, the moonlight followed her across the floor. Her shadow moved softly beside her, long and thin, merging with the walls that had watched her for years. She paused once more, looking around the quiet space that had been her home, her shelter, her world. Nothing had broken. Nothing had been lost. Outside, the last raindrop fell. Inside, Elizabeth breathed in the silence between storms, and let it fill her with the strength that only stillness could give. The long horizon. Morning arrived clear after the rain. The world seemed freshly drawn, every line sharper, every color softer. The air carried the scent of wet leaves and clean stone, and light poured through the high windows as if the sky itself had been washed. Elizabeth stood by the same window as she always did, but today the view seemed wider, deeper, alive. The storm had passed, and the silence it left behind felt full, not empty. In the gardens below, the fountains shimmered again, their waters bright beneath the sun. Servants moved quietly through the paths, trimming, sweeping, restoring. Everything returned to order, yet something invisible had changed. Elizabeth felt it within herself, a quiet expansion, as if the storm had taken some weight away and left space for breath. She dressed simply that morning, preferring soft fabrics, plain colors. As the attendants prepared her hair, she looked toward the horizon. The line where sky met earth had always drawn her attention. It was never still. Even when she stood unmoving, her eyes followed that endless line, wondering what lay beyond it. The day's meetings began as usual, reports, petitions, questions. Each voice entered the great chamber, one after another, blending into a quiet rhythm. Elizabeth listened carefully, her mind clear, her words few. She had long since learned that wisdom was rarely found in speech, but often revealed in pause. Her counsel spoke of trade, of harvests, of peace treaties waiting to be confirmed. Each matter carried its own weight, yet she managed them all with steady calm. When someone sought quick approval, she waited. When others disagreed, she spoke gently, her tone soft but final. Her presence brought a kind of order that could not be taught, the kind that came only from stillness, mastered over time. After the last paper was signed, she dismissed the council and asked to walk alone. The palace halls glowed with light, and the air carried a faint echo of music from somewhere far away. She moved slowly, tracing her hand along the cool surface of the wall, feeling the texture of history beneath her fingertips. In the courtyard, the grass was wet but sparkling. The world was quiet except for the distant coo of doves. She stepped onto the path that led toward the east garden, where the view opened wide beyond the palace grounds. The horizon stretched far and pale, the sky a gentle shade of blue that faded into white. She stood there for a while, watching. The wind lifted a strand of her hair. The sunlight touched her face. She closed her eyes for a moment and breathed deeply, letting the stillness of the morning sink into her. There were times when she thought of the past, not as memory, but as texture. The long hours of study, the silence of waiting, the burden of choice. All of it had shaped her into this moment, standing before a horizon that never ended. She no longer sought meaning in every event. She had come to understand that life revealed itself gradually, through repetition, through patience, through rhythm. What mattered was not the grand moments of triumph or loss, but the quiet continuity between them. A soft voice broke her thought. One of her attendants had followed at a respectful distance, carrying a letter. Elizabeth turned and accepted it with a small nod. The seal bore familiar markings, correspondence from another court, far away. She read it slowly, her expression calm, her eyes steady. The words spoke of alliances, of agreements, of balance to be maintained. She folded the paper and looked once more toward the horizon. The future always came written in such lines: promises, negotiations, movements of men and nations. Yet behind it all, she knew the same truth remained. The world turned, quietly, endlessly. She dismissed the attendant and walked further into the garden. The air was warm now, the rain long gone. The sound of the fountains echoed softly, and the wind carried the faint rustle of distant trees. Every step she took felt deliberate, grounded. At a small marble bench, she sat and let the sunlight rest on her hands. The stone beneath her was cool, the world around her still. Birds moved between the branches, and for a brief moment she felt time stop. Not in fear, but in peace. It was in moments like this that she understood her place most clearly. She was part of something vast, but she did not need to control it. Her task was to hold calm in a world that rarely offered it. That, she thought, was enough. The hours drifted by gently. Servants came and went, carrying messages, arranging duties, ensuring all things moved as they should. The rhythm of the palace continued, quiet and steady, like breath. As the afternoon deepened, she returned to her chambers. Light filtered through the tall curtains, soft and golden. The room smelled faintly of paper and lavender. Her desk awaited her, neatly arranged, letters to review, records to approve, the steady pulse of responsibility that never ceased. She sat and began her work again, the quill moving across the page with smooth precision. Each signature, each line was a reminder of her role, not to command, but to maintain balance, to be the calm between others' haste. When the final document was complete, she placed the pen down and leaned back in her chair. The light had begun to fade, turning from gold to silver. Outside, the horizon glowed faintly in the last light of day. She rose, walked to the window, and stood there once more. The world stretched endlessly before her, villages, forests, rivers, all fading into the mist of distance. She wondered how many lives moved quietly within that view, how many stories unfolded unnoticed beneath the same sky. It humbled her to think of it, but it also brought peace. The horizon, she realized, was not a destination. It was a reminder that the world continues beyond what one can see, that stillness can exist even where movement never stops. As the first star appeared above the treetops, Elizabeth felt the quiet of evening settle around her once more. The palace dimmed, the air cooled, the day gave itself to night. She stayed by the window until the sky turned completely dark. The reflection of her face blended with the stars beyond the glass. For a moment, it was hard to tell where the world ended and where she began. Then she turned, extinguished the last candle, and let the calm of the night close around her like a gentle tide. Echoes of the past. Night had settled gently over the palace. The air was cool and still, carrying the faint scent of rain from the day before. Elizabeth stood once more by the window, her gaze following the slow drift of clouds across the sky. The city below was quiet, its narrow streets faintly glowing with lantern light, its distant hum softened by distance and time. She found herself tracing the edge of the horizon again, though this time it was not the future she saw, but the past. The candle on her desk burned low, its flame steady, its light warm. Papers lay untouched beside it, her quill resting where she had left it hours before. Tonight, the weight of decisions did not press upon her. Instead, a different stillness filled the room, one made of memory. She thought of her childhood, of the corridors she had once walked with lighter steps, of laughter that had long faded but not disappeared. The voices of tutors, the rustle of books, the distant notes of songs from the gardens all returned in fragments, soft as echoes. The palace, she realized, remembered everything. The walls that now surrounded her reign had once enclosed her innocence. They had watched her learn, watched her wait, and now watched her lead. She moved toward her writing table and sat quietly. The sound of the chair against the floor seemed louder than usual, a reminder of how silence can amplify the smallest things. For a while, she simply sat there, her eyes resting on the flicker of the candle flame. Time had moved like water, slow and constant, and she could no longer separate one season from another. The years had layered themselves into a seamless whole, and yet, beneath it all, she could still hear the faint rhythm of youth, a heartbeat long remembered. There were nights like this one when she wondered about those she had known and lost, faces that once surrounded her, now blurred by years and distance. Some had gone quietly, others had vanished like whispers caught in the wind. Each had shaped her in some small way, and though she spoke of none of them now, they lingered in her mind, not as sorrow, but as reminders of time's gentle persistence. She rose and crossed the room to a small chest near the fireplace. From within it, she lifted a single object, a book, its leather worn and pages softened by age. It was one of her earliest, filled with notes written in the careful hand of a girl who had not yet known the world's weight. She turned the pages slowly, reading her own words from decades past. Some lines were simple, others clumsy, yet each carried a quiet truth she had not recognized then. Patience is a kind of strength. Stillness can move the world. She smiled faintly. Even then, her younger self had reached for calm, had written of peace without knowing its cost. She closed the book gently and returned it to its place. Outside, the wind shifted. The faint creak of the windows reminded her that even stone was never completely still. Everything, no matter how solid, carried within it the echo of motion. She walked slowly through her chambers, her steps measured, her breath even. The portraits on the walls looked down at her, generations past, each captured in perfect stillness. Yet she knew they too had lived through their own storms, their own quiet nights of reflection. It comforted her somehow to know that she was only one among many who had stood in the same light, breathed the same air, and wondered the same questions. As she reached the doorway, she paused. Beyond it stretched the long corridor, bathed in soft shadow. The candles flickered gently, their light shifting over the stone. She began to walk, her footsteps steady and slow. The palace at night had its own voice, the faint hum of wind through arches, the occasional creak of wood, the whisper of fabric as she passed. All of it formed a kind of music. It was not silence, not entirely, but something deeper. The presence of things remembered. When she reached the great hall, she stopped at the center and looked up. The ceiling arched high above, painted with fading stars that had watched her since childhood. The same stars still glowed faintly beyond the windows now. For a moment, she felt the distance between her and the girl who had once stood here long ago. The girl who had dreamed, studied, waited. Now there was no waiting. There was only the quiet act of being, of holding space in time. Elizabeth lowered her gaze and turned back toward her room. The candlelight followed her in fragments, falling across her hands, her face, the crown resting lightly upon her hair. She no longer thought of the crown as a symbol of power. To her, it was a reflection of continuity, of how each moment connects to the next, each silence leading to another sound. She returned to her writing desk and sat once more. Taking up her pen, she began to write. The ink moved smoothly across the page, the words forming without effort. The past does not vanish. It waits quietly in the corners of the present. She paused, watching the ink dry, then continued. What we remember is not gone, it simply changes shape. It becomes the air we breathe, the stillness we keep, the calm we offer others when their storms arrive. When she finished, she set the pen aside and leaned back slightly, her eyes closing for a moment. The candle flame flickered, and the sound of the wind grew softer. She could feel the pulse of the palace, steady, ancient, alive. The past, she thought, is not behind us. It walks beside us, silent and unseen, shaping the way we move through each day. She opened her eyes again and smiled faintly. The flame had grown smaller now, nearing its end. She did not replace it. The darkness approaching was not something to fear, only something to rest within. When the candle finally went out, the room filled with a gentle hush. She remained seated, her thoughts calm, her breath slow. The echoes of the past surrounded her, not as ghosts, but as companions. And in that deep, complete quiet, Elizabeth felt once again what she had known all her life, that peace is not found in the absence of memory, but in learning to live gently with it. The winter years. The seasons turned again, as they always did, and winter returned to the palace. The air grew sharp, the sky pale and distant. Frost traced delicate lines along the windows each morning, and the gardens slept beneath a veil of white. Elizabeth stood often at her window, watching the slow fall of snow. The world outside seemed softer in those months, quieter, slower, as if it too had learned the value of stillness. The corridors of the palace echoed less now. The bustle of the court had thinned, and the laughter that once filled its halls had become a memory. Yet she did not find sadness in it. There was peace in the quiet rhythm of age, a steady awareness that everything, no matter how bright, eventually settles into calm. Her mornings began as they always had, though her pace had slowed. Servants moved gently around her, their voices low, their gestures careful. The fire in her chamber burned earlier now and stayed lit long into the night. The warmth of the flames followed her like a companion, soft and constant. She spent more time in her study. The desk that had once held the business of nations now carried fewer papers, fewer demands. Yet she still kept it in perfect order. Her pen, her books, her sealed letters, all remained as they had been, a quiet reflection of discipline unchanged by time. Outside, the trees stood bare against the grey sky. Sometimes she watched the wind move through them, bending their thin branches, shaking loose the last dry leaves. It reminded her of strength, not the kind that resists, but the kind that endures. The trees never fought the wind, they yielded, and in yielding, they survived. She thought often of the years behind her, not with longing, but with recognition. Each season had brought its own lessons, its own storms and calms, and though much of it had passed beyond her reach, it all remained within her, not as memory, but as quiet understanding. Visitors still came from time to time, advisors, dignitaries, those who sought her counsel. They spoke with reverence, and she listened with the same still patience that had marked her rule. Her words were fewer now, but they carried weight. When she spoke, it was with the ease of someone who no longer needed to prove anything. "Peace," she once said to a young courtier, "is not something we find. It is something we allow." The young man had bowed deeply, not entirely understanding, but he would remember the words long after she was gone. Afternoons were her favorite hours. The sun, when it appeared, hung low in the sky, filling her chambers with golden light that lingered on every surface. She would sit by the fire, a blanket over her knees, her eyes half closed. The sound of crackling wood became her company. Sometimes she read, though more often she simply held the book and thought. The words on the pages seemed less important now than the quiet they created around her. The palace itself seemed to change with her. The servants walked slower, spoke softer, as if in respect for the gentleness that filled its walls. Even the clocks seemed to tick more quietly, their rhythm blending with the steady breath of the fire. At night, when all was still, she would rise from her chair and move to the window once more. The snow outside glowed faintly beneath the moonlight. The city lay distant and silent, its rooftops covered in white. She would rest her hand against the cold glass and watch her own reflection blend with the night beyond. There was no fear in her. Age had not diminished her mind, only softened its edges. The world she had once ruled so carefully now seemed to move on its own, and she was content to let it. Control, she had learned, was only ever temporary. What lasted was composure. On certain mornings when the light came early and the frost shone bright, she walked slowly through the garden paths. The air bit at her skin, but she welcomed it. The chill reminded her that she was still part of the world, breathing, moving, alive. The gardens were empty, the fountains frozen in place, their shapes captured mid-motion. Even in stillness, there was beauty. She would stop sometimes beside the largest tree in the courtyard. It had stood there since her youth, older than her reign, older perhaps than the palace itself. Its branches reached high, unbroken. She placed her hand upon its bark, rough and cold, and smiled faintly. "You have outlasted us all," she would whisper, though no one was near enough to hear. As the days shortened, her strength waned. The fire burned longer, the nights stretched deeper. She no longer attended council. Instead, her time was given to reflection, not of what had been achieved or lost, but simply of what had been. She wrote occasionally, though her handwriting had grown smaller, slower. The last pages in her journal were not of decisions or decrees, but of observation. The color of morning light, the scent of snow in the air, the silence of footsteps in an empty hall. One line, written near the end, read, "The world grows quieter, and in its quiet I find myself again." She closed the book after that and did not open it again. In her final weeks, the palace moved gently around her. Servants spoke in whispers, fires were tended with care, and time itself seemed to slow. She spent her days by the window, wrapped in warmth, watching the slow dance of winter's end. On her last evening, the sun set in soft color, gold fading to rose, rose fading to blue. The air outside was still, neither warm nor cold, as if the world itself was holding its breath. Elizabeth sat quietly, her eyes on the horizon. The light touched her face one last time, and she smiled. Not at the past, nor the future, but at the calm that had carried her through them both. When the stars appeared, she closed her eyes and let the silence take her hand. And in that moment, there was no crown, no court, no burden. Only the endless quiet of peace. The quiet legacy. When the bells of the palace rang that morning, their sound carried softly through the mist. The news spread slowly, not in shouts or tears, but in whispers. The Queen had passed in her sleep. It was not a shock. The air itself seemed to have known. The sun rose quietly, as if reluctant to disturb the calm she left behind. In the days that followed, the palace moved as though in a dream. Servants walked gently, their voices lowered, their gestures deliberate. Curtains were drawn halfway, fires burned low, and every sound, the closing of doors, the tread of feet, seemed softened by memory. Outside, the city continued, markets opened, carriages rolled through cobblestone streets, and life, as it must, went on. Yet within the walls of the palace, time seemed to pause. Those who had known her spoke little. They did not tell grand stories or make speeches. Instead, they remembered her through smaller things. The way she listened without haste, the steadiness in her eyes when others faltered, the calm that seemed to follow her into every room. There was a hush that lingered in the halls where she had walked, and many found themselves slowing their pace, as if unwilling to break the stillness she had left behind. In her study, the desk remained untouched. The final pages of her journal lay open, her handwriting faint but steady. There were no declarations, no last words, only quiet reflections. The same calm voice that had guided her all her life. One line, written in her final days, read, "When I am gone, let the silence speak for me." Those who found it did not weep. They simply stood for a long moment, listening to the silence she had asked to remain. Weeks passed. The air of mourning faded slowly, replaced by something gentler. The people did not forget her, they simply carried her forward in quiet ways. The gardens she had loved were tended carefully, the fountains kept clean, the halls maintained without change. There were no monuments, no grand statues. Her memory did not demand them. Instead, her presence endured in the rhythm of life itself. In the order she had shaped, the patience she had taught, the peace she had left behind. When spring came, the first flowers bloomed early that year. Some said it was coincidence, others called it grace. But for those who had served her, the sight of the gardens alive again brought comfort. The world had not ended. It had only turned another page. Historians would later write of her reign, of politics, of victories, of alliances made and broken. But those who had stood near her, knew that her true legacy was not in wars or treaties, but in the quiet strength she carried through both. She had ruled not by force, but by steadiness. And long after her crown had been set aside, that steadiness remained, rippling outward like calm water after a stone is dropped. In the years that followed, her name was spoken less often, yet always with respect. The palace continued its routines, each generation leaving new marks upon its walls. Yet in certain corners, the gallery, the east window, the great hall, visitors would pause there without knowing why, drawn to the hush that seemed to rest upon the air. Outside, the world changed. New rulers came, new voices rose, and history unfolded as it always had. But the quiet legacy she had left endured, invisible, steady, woven into the life of the place itself. The tree in the courtyard she had once touched still stood, its branches broad, its roots deep. Each winter, it shed its leaves, and each spring it returned, a living echo of time's gentle persistence. Those who tended it called it the Queen's Tree, though no record named it so. It did not need a title. It simply was. And perhaps that was the truest reflection of her. Something constant, unspoken, alive without need for attention. Generations later, scholars would visit her writings, kept carefully in the royal archives. They would note the simplicity of her words, the balance of her thoughts. They would find no drama there, no revelations. But they would find peace. One historian wrote, "Her calm was not the calm of inaction, but the calm of understanding." And another, centuries after her time, would write, "She mastered not the world but herself, and through that mastery the world found peace." These words, though written long after her passing, captured something that those around her had always known, that greatness can exist quietly. Even as the centuries turned, her name endured softly, not as legend, but as memory. Schools would teach her reign in brief lessons, painters would depict her in muted tones, poets would speak of her as the stillness after a storm. Yet beyond the words, her legacy lived most in the silence, in the art of patience, in the dignity of restraint, in the grace of calm that others sought to learn. And so, though the palace changed and time moved forward, the quiet she had left behind never truly faded. It lived in the air, in the steady rhythm of life continuing. Each evening, as the sun set behind the western towers, light would fall across the empty halls she once walked. The glow lingered there, warm and golden, before fading into dusk. Those who saw it said it looked as though the palace itself remembered her, not with sorrow, but with peace. And in that gentle light, the quiet legacy of Elizabeth endured, not carved in stone, not written in song, but held softly in the stillness of time. The eternal calm. Dawn came gently, as if the sky itself remembered how to breathe again. The first light spilled slowly across the land, touching rooftops, treetops, and the long stones of the palace courtyard. For a moment, nothing stirred. The world seemed to wait, suspended between night and morning. Then, with quiet certainty, the day began. Inside the palace, the corridors were bathed in pale gold. The air felt lighter now, as though the weight of years had finally lifted. Servants moved with quiet purpose, opening windows, drawing curtains, and letting the new day in. Somewhere in the distance, a bell rang once, soft, measured, like a heartbeat continuing on. The years had passed, but her presence remained, not as sound, not as sight, but as something gentler, a rhythm that lived within the place itself. In the stillness of dawn, it could almost be felt, like warmth left behind after a hand has been lifted from the surface of water. The palace had changed, of course. Walls had been repainted, chambers renamed, and new voices filled its halls. Yet beneath every change, her calm endured. Quiet, invisible, unwavering. Those who came after her spoke often of peace, of balance, of order. Some ruled well, others less so. But each, in their own way, found traces of her presence. In the measured way the servants moved, in the soft tone of the morning bell, in the silence that still lived within the walls at dusk. It was said that no ruler ever felt truly alone there. The palace, they said, held its own kind of wisdom. And perhaps, in some wordless way, it did. Beyond the city, the world had shifted many times. Kingdoms rose and faded, wars began and ended, and still the same horizon stretched beyond the fields. Endless, calm, unbroken. Generations forgot her name, then found it again, dusted off in old books and spoken in quiet lessons. Children would visit the gardens that bore her name and marvel at their symmetry. Scholars would trace her letters and speak of her restraint. Artists painted her image in shades of grey and gold, each capturing not her power, but her composure. And in the great archives deep within the palace, her writings remained, preserved carefully, their ink fading but still legible. Those who read them spoke of their simplicity, their clarity, their quiet faith in time itself. One page, found long after, bore only a single line, written in her unmistakable hand. When calm is remembered, it has not ended. It became a saying passed down through generations. Teachers repeated it to their pupils, parents to their children, and leaders to themselves when the world grew uncertain. Though few recalled where it had begun, its meaning endured. That peace is not the absence of struggle, but the presence of steadiness through it. As the centuries turned, the palace itself aged gracefully. The tree in the courtyard grew massive, its roots deep, its branches reaching wider with every year. Travelers from distant lands would rest beneath it, unaware of its history, feeling only its shade and quiet. They would say the air there felt different, calmer, lighter, peaceful. No one could explain why. In spring, blossoms fell across the stone paths carried by the wind. In winter, snow gathered in soft layers upon the roof. Time touched everything gently, and yet the essence of her reign, her calm, remained untouched. The world outside grew faster, machines appeared, voices filled with urgency, and the rhythm of life became quick and restless. But within those ancient walls the stillness persisted. Visitors often remarked upon it, how time seemed to slow the moment they entered, how their thoughts grew quieter, their breath steadier. Some said it was only the echo of history. Others believed it was something more. No matter what they thought, they all felt the same calm. And so, her legacy did not end in words or monuments. It lived instead in that feeling, the one that arrived without warning, soft as a sigh, steady as a heartbeat. The quiet that asks for nothing, yet gives everything. At dusk, when the light fades across the western towers, the same soft glow touches the windows where she once stood. The golden hue lingers a moment longer there before slipping into blue. Those who pass through that hall often pause, for reasons they cannot explain. Something in the air feels almost alive, not haunting, not solemn, but peaceful. In that space, the past and the present seem to meet, neither overpowering the other. Only stillness remains. If one listens closely, in that hour between light and dark, there is a sound, faint, rhythmic, like the echo of footsteps upon marble, or perhaps the wind moving softly through long curtains. It fades quickly, blending with silence. But it leaves behind a sense of presence, a quiet assurance that calm, once found, is never lost. And beyond the palace walls, the horizon continues, endless, luminous, serene. The same line she once watched from her window, unchanged through the centuries. The same sky, the same light, the same slow turning of the world beneath it. Each dawn, it begins again. The soft unfolding of light, the hum of awakening, the breath of a world that remembers. The calm she carried has become part of it now, not bound to her name, nor to her crown, but to the air itself. And though her story has long since ended, her peace remains, quiet, enduring, eternal.